Hi everybody, welcome back. High Evolutionary is right around the corner. He should be released this week. That means it's time to make some decks for him. High Evolutionary is going to start a whole new archetype, and I think there's going to be some subsets of archetypes within him. So in this video, we're going to talk about the base cards that go with High Evolutionary, two of the primary type of decks that you can make, and then of course hybrids. We're going to provide 5 intro decks for High Evolutionary to get started on day 1 once he's released. Some of these we think might be a little better than others, but it's definitely something to start with. Would love to hear from you which decks you're planning on using with High Evolutionary, or how you might change something that we've got in these graphics. Because each one of these decks, we've got a graphic for you. First type of High Evolutionary deck we've got is an Unspent Energy. This is going to lean into all the High Evolutionary cards that make it so that you get some additional power or negative afflicts to your opponent when you do not spend all your energy each turn. The next one we'll look at is the negative afflicts, where anytime you use a certain card, it hits your opponent, allowing you to hopefully get a free A-bomb later. And then the last ones are some hybrids, which could use a little bit of each and mix in some other cards that might help make the deck even stronger. First, we need to understand the cards that High Evolutionary affects and what those changes are. So let's hit those real quick. It's important to understand all you need to do is have High Evolutionary in your deck for these things to happen. So at the start of the game, he unlocks the potential of all cards with no abilities. First up, we've got Wasp, which is a negative afflict card, meaning she's going to hurt your opponent with some negative power. Obviously, 0 cost, 1 power. On reveal, afflict 2 random enemy cards here with -1 power. And I emphasize that here because at times, if there are no enemy cards there, this card is not going to do what you want it to. So you got to make sure to play it in the right locations. I think Wasp is a great card as is. Next up, we've got Misty Knight. She's an Unspent Energy type card. 1 cost, 2 power. When you end a turn with Unspent Energy, give another friendly card +1 power. The placement of Misty does not matter. She's just going to give an additional card of yours 1 additional power if you do not spend energy. It's not a bad card, but not a great card. Next up is Shocker. It's sort of an unspent energy use type card because on reveal, he gives the leftmost card in your hand -1 cost. I'd say arguably Shocker is probably the worst card of the bunch, but there is a huge advantage for him in a particular deck that we're going to look at because it could make it insanely strong if you hit this right, but we'll get more on that later. Shocker is a 2 cost, 3 power card. Next up is Cyclops. He's probably a combo between the Unspent Energy and Negative Afflict cards. He's likely the next worst behind Shocker, but still a decently important card. Part of the issue I have with Cyclops is if you play him on turn 3, then you only have turn 4 if you want to try to play A-bomb on 5 for cost reduction. You can certainly get turn 4 and 5 to reduce that A-bomb for a turn 6, but if your A-bomb does not become free and you're trying to pair him up with, say, a She-Hulk or a 6 cost Hulk, unless that A-bomb goes to 0, then you're not playing that Hulk along with the A-bomb. But the big part with Cyclops that makes him even more of a problem is he reads, when you end a turn with Unspent Energy, afflict 2 random enemies here with -1 power. So if you play him on 3 and you only have turns 4 and 5 to afflict that negative energy, you really need to make sure that you play him on a location where someone's got cards already, or hope they play cards there later, which people are going to quickly learn. If you see a Cyclops on the board and you are thinking somebody has a High Evolutionary deck, you are not going to want to play your cards there because you know you're going to help your opponent get a cheaper Abomination. How many times have you seen your opponent play, or you do it yourself, where you just sit and wait and potentially don't even play on turn 3? I see that as one of the biggest weaknesses of Cyclops. And like I said, if you blind play Cyclops on turn 3, it's unlikely someone's going to stack up in the same lane. Now, you could certainly use that to your advantage, say maybe pairing with a Nebula. So between Shocker and Cyclops, I think these are 2 cards that you could potentially buff a bit. If you gave Shocker Cyclops abilities, Shocker would be potentially one of the better cards in the game because you can play him either earlier and or you can play him later for cheaper costs. But if I was going to change Shocker, I would look at maybe reducing by 2 cost, or maybe the 2 leftmost cards, sort of like Nakia. Next up, we've got Thing, who's a negative afflict card. Definitely a solid card and has got some Zabu synergy. Anytime you're looking for those hybrid decks, Thing still costs 4 and has 6 power, and on reveal afflicts a random enemy card again here with -1 power. Repeat this twice more. Now, the part that is really nice about Thing that makes him better than Cyclops is that he is going to repeat this multiple times so that if your opponent only has one card in that location, it's going to hit it 3 times. That doesn't necessarily help with the A-bomb, but at least you keep taking that power away. It's going to be interesting to see in Cyclops, if there's only one card playing a location, if you can affect that one card twice. TBD, but I would expect that not to be the case. Next up, we've got arguably one of the strongest, if not the strongest card in this deck, Abomination. This is a Negative Afflict card, and really getting a free Abomination is the focus of those sort of Negative Affliction decks. Starts off at 5 cost, 9 power, and he costs 1 less for each enemy card in play that's afflicted with negative power. And this is where it's important. It doesn't matter how much negative afflictions you've done, it matters how many cards have been negative afflicted. So that's why Cyclops placement on a location that has multiple cards is critical. And ideally with Thing as well, the problem with Thing is it could be random. Same thing with Wasp. So you're really hoping to get 5 cards afflicted with negative power to get that free A-bomb. There's already a card in game that can help you do that without any of this, which I'm sure you're already thinking of and we'll definitely have in one of our hybrids. Last but certainly not least is Hulk. This is an unspent energy card. 6 costs, starting with 12 power, plus 2 power for each turn you ended with unspent energy. So there's a chance that you could add 10 power to a Hulk, creating a 22-point card. And getting a big Hulk is certainly the goal of the unspent energy archetype. So those are the base cards for the High Evolutionary archetype. Like we said, you could mix and match these. You could focus on one type with the unspent energy or the Negative Affliction. That's one of the reasons why I support people buying High Evolutionary as one of the big bags early in their Marvel Snap gameplay, because all of these cards come really early and easy to get, as well as giving a lot of different options. All right, so it's time to get into these decks. I want to show one deck that was going to be absolutely broken prior to Second Dinner changing wave. I'm guessing they saw this and it would have been some insanity in my mind, but holy cow, with this turn 6, it would have been massive with an Evolution of Death wave. Can you imagine getting wave down and playing A-Bomb, Doom, She-Hulk, Death all on a final turn? That would have been absolute insanity. Good thing they changed wave before this came into the game. The first deck we're going to look at is an Unspent Energy deck, and I have to admit, originally I thought this might have been the weaker of the archetypes with High Evolutionary, but after looking at this a little bit, I really think it could be the strongest. I want to do a quick explanation on exactly how these graphics work so you have an understanding, just in case it might not be intuitive to you to how this looks. Here you go. Quick explanation for the WolverSNAP deck graphics. We've got 3 different sections. The bottom left, you will see the name, the version along with the date, some promo, a specific type of deck, whether it's a starter, maybe an archetype, etc. Probably the most important section, the legend, where we got 4 different colors classifying the different cards, where we've got red for foundation, which means that is the key card or cards in this deck. Orange for critical. Those are the next most important cards. We've got yellow for impact, which are not quite critical, but still very impactful. And then last but not least, we've got green, which are flex cards, meaning you can have a different card in place of that. Those cards are specifically shown in this bottom right section, and they are highlighted with a big green box. The top section shows the entire deck, and every card in this top section is going to have a color highlight behind it indicating what type of card it is, whether it's a foundation, critical, impact, or flex. So when you see red behind a card, that means it is a foundation card. When you see an orange behind a card, that means it's critical. If it's yellow, it's impact. Green means flex, and again, that ties down to the bottom section. Every card has its abilities shown over it, and in the rare circumstance where you might have a foundation card that could have another foundation card filled in for it, we've got a little light green border around that one, and then in the flexible section in the bottom, we've got a red border around that, so that you know those two might be able to be swapped for each other. Prior to getting into the specific cards of this deck, we want to give some overarching keys to this specific deck. Cyclops has to be played at a location that your opponent has 2 cards in, or you might not get any benefit from it. We'll say it several times. Cyclops and Nebula could go well together. You're really trying to get a few negative afflictions out and trying to get that Abomination and She-Hulk together. Sunspot's going to be soaking the Unspent, and Misty's going to give additional power every time that's happening. Hulk is there for you for the back-end play for a potential strong turn 6 or later if you do Magic. Magic, Arnim Zola, and Taskmaster can make this deck even stronger if the cards play in the right order, and you don't get Scarlet Witched and or Stormed on that limbo location. So the foundation cards in this Unspent energy deck are going to be obviously High Evolutionary. That's going to be consistent with all of these decks. Absolute must have. He's going to be in your deck. We're not going to focus on him any more than that. He's likely going to be a card you almost never play. So the biggest card that you want in your Unspent energy is obviously going to be Hulk. Every opportunity you have to not spend energy on a turn, you certainly want to do it to build up that power. Anytime you don't spend energy in a deck, you're always looking at a She-Hulk card, because any turn you're not spending a certain amount of energy, the next turn, She-Hulk has her cost reduced by that same amount of energy you did not spend. Now, while this is an unspent energy deck, we do have some negative affliction cards in here, because when you have Cyclops, who's sort of a hybrid, you could add another card that has a negative afflict, like a Wasp, that has no cost and helps with the unspent energy to be able to tick away at your opponent to get a cheaper and or free A-Bomb. An Abomination is the first critical card in this deck to go along with Wasp and Sunspot. Wasp with that 0 cost is going to be pivotal, because you will be able to play her potentially on maybe a turn 5 or 6 to get something powerful and late. Sunspot is a critical card here just because anytime you're not spending energy, you want to soak it up and gain that power back on the board, and Sunspot lets you do that because at the end of each turn, you're going to gain +1 power for every unspent energy. Then we've got our impact cards on this. Those are going to be Cyclops, Magic, and Arnim Zola. So for all the turns that you are not spending energy, you're going to be using Cyclops to afflict 2 random enemies with -1 power at whatever location he's at. Next, we've got Magic. We're doing this to try to get an additional turn to not just get a cheaper A-Bomb, but to get a more powerful Hulk. Magic helps you extend the game to a turn 7, but always be weary of those Scarlet Witches and Storms to ruin your day on turn 6. The other impact card we have here is Arnim Zola. The way we would love to play Arnim here is to leave a lane open. This can be difficult with Cyclops, given that he needs to be played in a spot with multiple cards, so plan ahead, and with Magic. But the idea is that you leave a lane open, try to play Hulk on 6, play Zola on 7 to destroy and copy that Hulk into your other 2 lanes. Adding anywhere from 16 to 20 plus power in 2 other lanes is super strong. Then we have our flex cards in Misty Knight, Enchantress, and Taskmaster. Misty, you do want to try to get out early in the game if you know you're going to be doing unspent energy. I do not believe she's going to act retroactively, so you're going to want to have her on the board. So that way, anytime you end a turn with unspent energy, you're giving another card on the board 1 more power. Enchantress is in here to remove those ongoing abilities, because what we're expecting to have to counter these high evolutionary decks, and this is going to happen with all of them that are trying to do any negative affliction, is a Luke Cage. Because if Luke Cage gets played on the board prior to you playing that A-Bomb, that cost goes right back to 5. More on the Luke Cage strategy a little bit later. And then last flex card we've got on here is Taskmaster. Taskmaster is a great potential card to play on that turn 7 if you've already played Hulk, or even turn 6 if for some reason you're not able to get Hulk, but you got a cheap She-Hulk to be able to copy, or even an A-Bomb. So our flex out are Enchantress, Misty, and Taskmaster. And the flex ins that we're looking at, Rogue, another one, I'd probably only flex that in for the Enchantress spot if you just want to try to be a little bit more direct at who you're taking from somebody. But again, there's RNG in Rogue's ability. She's definitely a card that I'd look for the buff list at some point. Nebula, always a great card anytime you're not playing something or you're trying to get your opponent to play in a certain area. Again, we said earlier, good pairing with Cyclops. You drop Nebula early on, run and then just know you're going to drop your Cyclops at that location later, it's a great play. Scorpion to get some more Negative Affliction on the board. Unless your opponent starts holding all those cards in their hand, which sort of messes with their flow, Scorpion is a great card to have in these Negative Affliction type situations. Armor and Cosmo for your big card protection. Given that you're going to play some of these cards late, unless you're doing a Magic on turn 5 and potentially Hulk on turn 6, these might be able to be left out because we did have some others that we were looking at with obviously a Shang-Chi for any sort of control, Shocker to potentially get some more cheap cards to have unspent energy, and Psylocke for some turn 4 plays if needed. We're going to dive more into how that Psylocke play can be good in one of these later decks, so definitely don't sleep on her. So things you want to look out for when playing this deck, obviously, anytime you've got ones on the board, specifically a Sunspot or a Misty Knight that's trying to give you additional power, you got to look out for Killmonger, which is why we have armor in an alternate for this deck. Anytime you're playing big cards above 9 or higher, you need to watch out for Shang-Chi. Again, Cosmo and or armor are your friend there. Mentioned it earlier, but anytime you use magic, you got to look out for Scarlet Witch and Storm to end it on turn 6 to take that limbo away. Sandman and or Waves could maybe make this a little bit harder for a strong multiple card play late. But if you're building the Unspent and your Hulk is getting bigger, this is not the end of the world. Especially if you end up doing the Zola play on a location with just one Hulk and you move it to 2 other spots. So that's the first deck, the Unspent Energy. Definitely comment below what your thoughts are. All right, on to the next one. The next High Evolutionary archetype we're looking at is the Negative Affliction one. This one is pure Negative Affliction, no Unspent Energy. You're looking to hit your opponent and also get a free A-bomb. I actually used to think this might be the best one, but with an easy Luke Cage counter to this, I'm not so sure. There are counters to that counter, but let's go through it. Couple keys for this one, aside of getting as much Negative Affliction out as possible, is stay away from Cosmo. I debated having Wong in this deck as a main option, but with an easy Cosmo counter to a Wong location, I just couldn't justify it. When's Echo coming out again? And you need Luke Cage if you're using Hazmat, which you will see in this deck as well. Otherwise, both of those cards can be flex if you don't want to have that direct of an impact on yourself and your opponent. So let's go through these card by card. Again, 2 foundation cards. We've got High Evolutionary as always, and when you're looking at the Negative Affliction, your next foundation card is going to be Abomination. For every enemy card on the board that's Negative Afflicted, A-Bomb becomes 1 point cheaper, which is exactly why we've got these next 2 cards as part of our critical set of cards in this deck. Hazmat and Luke Cage. Hazmat is going to negatively afflict every single card that your opponent has. So as long as you play that before either turn 5 or on turn 5 to get a free A-Bomb on turn 6, there is very likely your opponent's going to have 5 cards on the board so you can get that free A-Bomb. The question is going to be, when do you play that Luke Cage? Because you're going to want to have that Luke Cage to keep those Negative Afflictions from affecting your own cards. Then you've got 2 Negative Affliction cards that come along with the High Evolutionary set, and that is going to be Wasp and Thing. Again, remember, these affect cards at that specific location. Wasp is going to pick 2 random cards. Thing is going to pick a random card and potentially do it 3 times, but depending on how many cards there and on the RNG, that could be anywhere from 1 to 3 cards affected. Next, we've got our impact cards, and we've got Odin and Zabu in this section. Odin is the 6-cost card that could come in late. This is probably just to get some additional Negative Affliction on your opponent to reduce their power, potentially to be played on a lane that you've already got multiple Negative Affliction cards on. You'll see a number of 4-cost cards in this deck, and because of that reason, Zabu is a great card to carry along here. He's going to reduce any of those 4-cost cards down to 1 less, so you might be able to get them a little earlier or combo a couple of them later. Then we've got our flex cards. We've got Scorpion, Absorbing Man, Enchantress, and Cyclops. Scorpion's the first one, and again, anytime you're talking about Negative Affliction on your opponent, Scorpion is a great option. Either your opponent decides to keep those in hand, which will mess with their flow, or you are going to get reduced costs for your A-Bomb. Given the numerous on-reveal cards in this situation, Abomination, Absorbing Man is a great option, especially when you're looking at a Zabu. He will copy whatever on reveal your last card was played, assuming it's still in play. And again, talking about anytime you've got a potential opponent with a Luke Cage, Enchantress is sort of carried along to potentially knock out that Luke Cage, so those negative afflictions stay on the board. And the last of the flex cards is against Cyclops, where anytime you might have some unspent energy, you'll get some negative afflictions on board. We have this as a flex here because the focus is not necessarily to not spend energy, but in case you're not doing it, we've got it on there. So remember, two of these flexes are Absorbing Man and Enchantress, which get reduced cost from Zabu. The ones that we're looking to potentially flex into the deck, obviously Rogue, anytime we're talking about Enchantress and trying to steal that Luke Cage. And I'll mention again, Rogue is RNG, so you never know if you're going to definitely hit that Luke Cage. I've got an unreleased card in this, actually Echo. I mentioned her earlier, but I do think she's going to be a card that's going to help. Given that Cosmo is likely something to look for in this deck, if you play Echo in a location where you're planning on playing multiple on reveals, she will help protect you from that Cosmo. Yes, I know she's not in the game yet, but I wanted to put it in here for something to think about for the future. But do beware, Killmongers lurk in the wild. Then the last three flex in options are all 4-cost cards that you could potentially get cheaper with Zabu. The first one would be Wong. I mentioned him earlier. He doubles up on those unreveals, but like I mentioned earlier, he is easily countered with a Cosmo, unless you have Echo, of course. I threw Super Scroll in here just because I think he's generally a good card. Now, ideally, it would mean you're taking a Luke Cage in case you don't draw yours, but that means you're also not negatively afflicting your opponent. So Super Scroll might be a flex that you could easily drop from this list. But again, with Zabu and a 4-cost, I thought, you know, let's just throw it on here just in case somebody's not playing a Luke Cage, but they have Darkhawks or Devil Dinos or Iron Men that might be able to be copied. And then last but not least of the flexes, we've got White Queen, which is a very powerful 4-cost card that also gives you some intel on your opponent. Some other flexible options that I don't have on this graphic because of the limited room. Spider-Woman, that is a great card to play late that could get a bunch of negative afflictions. Certainly you could throw America Chavez in just to thin the deck. Thanos is also an option, but we're going to have some decks dedicated to him later, so I didn't want to put him in here. And even Lockjaw might have been an option to cycle through some of those on reveals, but I didn't love that here, and we do get some Lockjaw love a little bit later. And if you definitely are going heavy on the 4s, you could even throw Shang-Chi in here to help with some control. Things to look out for, like I mentioned, Luke Cage. And this really is where the cat and mouse game begins with this card. Because if they play Luke Cage too early, that means you could Rogue or Enchantress it. But if they don't play it early enough, then you still get the A-Bomb for free. So that's where that balance is. If they don't get their Luke Cage out early enough and you get the A-Bomb for free, then the negative affliction still helps you with the free A-Bomb on a turn 5 or 6. I mentioned Cosmos earlier. You've got Wong and Hazmat and Thing and Wasp and Rogue and Enchantress and Odin. Cosmo can absolutely ruin this deck, which again is one more reason why I think Echo is a great option for when she does come to the game. And then certainly a Shang on your Abomination could hurt, but given that you're likely to play that late, I'm not super stressed about that. So that's it for that negative affliction deck. Let me know what your thoughts are on this one and how you might change it and what other alternate cards you'd put in here. This next deck might be my favorite of the bunch, calling it MoonABOM. It ties in with that concept of using Moon Girl to double up on some cards. It also, as far as the High Evolutionary sets go, it combos the unspent energy along with that negative affliction. You know you love that Moon Girl with She-Hulk. Now let's add an A-Bomb to it. We were discussing this one on the Discord, and that's where this one came from. If you want to join those discussions in the future, link in the description below. Before we get to each individual card, the keys for this deck: Moon Girl. Try to get the A-Bomb and this She-Hulk copied if possible. Wasp is not a bad option either. The goal is to get 2 free A-Bombs, 2 She-Hulks, though ideally only play the 0-cost one due to Quinjet in this, or you play 2 Wasps. What you could do is play 2 0-cost Wasps on turn 5, so you basically send no energy, and then turn 6, you could have 2 free A-Bombs, a free She-Hulk, and a 6-cost Hulk. I do my math right there? I think I did, right? Let me know if I missed something there. We talked about that a bit, and I think that's how we got it covered. That is a monstrous turn 6. You're looking at Psylocke in this deck. I mentioned her earlier in one of the other decks. She can be played on turn 2 to give you extra unspent energy on turn 3, even if you played with Cyclops, or if you have the ideal setup in your hand, you could play her early to get that Moon Girl maybe on turn 3, and that way you're doubling up those early cards right away. Similar to what we said with the Unspent energy, you've got Cyclops. It's got to be played on a particular location with a certain number of cards, otherwise he becomes very useless. You're trying to get some Negative Afflictions on the board to get that free A-Bomb and She-Hulk together with this. You've got your Sunspot for soaking up all that unspent energy, and Misty to give power anytime that actually happens. And then you've got your Hulk on the back end of this to build power for a, again, strong turn 6. Some ways to look at this is turn 1, you've got your Sunspot. Turn 2, potentially Shocker or Psylocke. Turn 3, Cyclops or Moon Girl. Turn 4, Moon Girl or Quinjet / Cyclops. Turn 5, you're basically skipping but playing Wasp. Turn 6, MoonABOM. Whatever you copied with your Moon Girl, which, like I mentioned, you're hoping for your She-Hulk, your A-Bombs, and then your Hulk. I just feel super strong with that turn 6. So looking at the graphic for this particular deck, again, we've got multiple foundation cards here. Obviously, High Evolutionary, Moon Girl off the bat, and then the 3 powerful cards that I mentioned with She-Hulk, Abomination, and Hulk. You're trying to get the She-Hulk and A-Bomb as cheap as possible. If you double them up right, you've got the Quinjet on the board. You're looking at a lot of free, potentially with a Hulk. That could be monstrous. As far as your critical cards, you've got your Wasp, your Quinjet, and your Cyclops here. Wasp to get Negative Afflictions on the board, Quinjet to help reduce that She-Hulk cost down to 0, or even the A-Bomb getting a little bit cheaper, and then your Cyclops again to play potentially late to get some Negative Afflictions on the board as well. You've got 2 impact cards here with your Sunspot for soaking up the energy that you're not using, and your Psylocke to use on those different turns to help with that unspent energy or to get some cards played a bit earlier like your Moon Girl if your hand's set up perfectly right away. Our 2 flex cards here, again, we've got Enchantress for potentially Luke Cage plays, and then Shocker. But one of the things I want to mention about Shocker with this is he can help keep the energy down, like I mentioned. And this is the part where I think he could be huge. If you get him prior to that Moon Girl to hit a She-Hulk on that left-hand side, that really helps with those lower energy costs late in game. But the question is can you get him early enough and with She-Hulk over there and then the duplicate? If you're able to pull that off, it might be a rarity, but he could be worth having in this deck. The other cards we're looking to flex in, again, Rogue, Luke Cage, but with the RNG, I'll keep saying it. We've got Misty Knight as a potential flex in here. I didn't like her as much as Shocker. Originally, that was in this deck to start with Shocker as an alternate. But I think with the potential upside of Shocker, if the chips fall right with such a big play on turn 6, I wanted to put Shocker in there, but if you want a little bit more consistency, Misty might be a bit better. Scorpion is probably be better than Shocker to get more Negative Affliction on the board. And as always, we've got Armor and Cosmo for those big card protection. But again, if you're playing those late, you might not necessarily need those, but Armor could still help with something like your Sunspot or your Quinjet. And remember, with Cosmo, it could interrupt your on reveals, so you got to play them in different locations. Things that you want to look out for when playing with this deck, again, Killmonger. You've got a critical and an impactful 1-cost card here that Killmonger can ruin. Anytime you're talking about multiple cards on a late play, you got to worry about your Sandman plays and now your waves. And like I mentioned, Shang-Chi on your bigs. A little less worried there because you're likely going to play them late. How do you like this deck? Do you think I'm off base on thinking this is the most exciting one of the bunch so far? Let me know in the comments below. Our second to last deck that we've got is a hybrid, primarily focused on Negative Affliction again with some Thanos control. Decided to call this one HiEvAnos Control. Feel free to troll in the comments below on that one. I will say that I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of the cube returns for a Thanos control at the moment, but I think this one is worth a mention and bringing up. The idea here is to use the Soul Stone to help with the Abomination costs to go along with Thing and Wasp. Cyclops is a flex in this, and you could certainly use him to help as well. You've got Daredevil and Spidey to get a Professor X lockdown situation. You've got Nebula in here to help focus a lane to free up another one for that Spidey Professor X. And that's really part of the keys here, is that Nebula / Professor X type situation where hopefully helps you lock down a lane, and the Negative Affliction on the board for a free A-Bomb. The specific cards in this deck, we've got 2 foundation cards with High Evolutionary and Abomination. We're leaning in the Negative Affliction, so Abomination's always going to be a foundation there. We've got 3 cards in the critical category with Thanos, Thing, and Wasp. Thanos is meant to help you with that Soul Stone and potentially get some additional Negative Affliction out there, and or potentially moving some cards around as well with the Space Stone. Just remember with Thing and Wasp, they are only Negative Afflicting cards in that specific location. We mentioned Nebula earlier. She's part of the Impact cards along with Daredevil, Professor X, and Spider-Man. That set of cards is helping you potentially lock down a particular lane. Daredevil helps make sure you just don't blindly throw the Professor X out there in case you don't Spidey the turn before. Nebula is helping you draw your opponent's cards to a particular lane as well. Your flex options in this are Armor, Enchantress, and Cyclops. Anytime you've got a Nebula, you're thinking about an Armor, and you've got a Thanos and an Abomination out there, which a Shang-Chi could ruin, or you're just messing with somebody who's doing some destroy and or you get a Death's Domain or anything along those lines, Armor can be helpful. Enchantress, again, whether it's a Luke Cage or any other ongoing card, Enchantress is a super powerful card to carry around. And then you've got Cyclops yet again to potentially give some Negative Afflictions anytime you're not spending energy. The only thing I really don't like about him in this particular deck is you don't have an opportunity to gain anything from not spending energy. The flex ins, we're looking at Rogue yet again, Scorpion yet again to get some more Negative Afflictions. You've got your Green Goblin for some more control and messing with your opponent. Hood to potentially throw over with Viper, who's also in this alt list, and to get a Demon in hand, which is a 1-cost 6 power card. And anytime you're talking about Negative Affliction, a potential alt is Spider-Woman as well. Again, I'm not sure I'm a huge fan of this one, but we were talking about this one on the Discord as well, and control can be a huge thing in game, so we wanted to put this out there. This is one I'd love to hear most from people. Is this one you think you'd be playing at all? Do you think it'd have any success? Love to hear in the comments below. Last but not least is our final hybrid. This one has a little bit of a mix of the Unspent energy as well as a Negative Affliction, is ultimately built off of the Lockjaw concept that I like to call Biggie Smalls, meaning using your smaller cards to pull out your bigger cards with Lockjaw. Since the Lockjaw nerf where you can only do 1 per turn, this does get to be a little difficult. So another hybrid deck I'm a little skeptical about, but could be pretty good. The small cards you've got in this deck are Nightcrawler, your Infinity Stones, and certainly Wasp. Again, I'm not sure I'm a big fan of the cube returns you're seeing from Lockjaw and or Thanos at the moment, but again, I think this is potentially worth a try. Keys to this deck is you want to feed Lockjaw as much as possible, move Lockjaw on a turn with Space Stone. So on turn 4, ideally you can play 1 into Lockjaw and the Space Stone in another location, move Lockjaw to potentially get multiple big cards in 2 locations. Or maybe you just have Living Tribunal. You've got Thing, Wasp, and the Soul Stone for Negative Afflictions. And Hulk is likely to ramp up here because you're not going to be playing a ton of cards each turn, meaning you're going to have some unspent energy. While not listed on this graphic, that means Sunspot could have some success here. So as far as the specific cards in this deck, we've got 3 foundation cards, as always, High Evolutionary, and we mentioned Lockjaw and Thanos for the Infinity Stones, and then Lockjaw to draw those higher power cards out with the lower cards, the Biggie Smalls, so to speak. Our critical cards in this are Hulk and Wasp. Hulk because you, like I mentioned earlier, you're likely to be having lots of unspent energy in a deck like this, and Wasp to potentially drop in that Lockjaw in case you're not drawing any stones, and to potentially get multiple Negative Afflictions. Impact cards are Thing, Abomination, and Devil Dinosaur. Thing is just something that you've got in the deck to potentially have some additional Negative Affliction. Abomination to potentially get for a cheap play late, or to get drawn in from Lockjaw from one of the lower cost plays. Devil Dinosaur, same concept. You're probably going to have a whole bunch of cards in your deck, so if you are pulling Devil Dino out from Lockjaw, that is a big win. Just look out for Rogue and or Enchantress. The flex options we have in here are 3 strong high power cards and 1 move card. Nightcrawler could easily be replaced with Jeff, but I know not a lot of people have Jeff, so I wanted to have Nightcrawler in the base set of this deck. Nightcrawler is a good option to put into Lockjaw. She-Hulk we have as a flex just in case you want to have a bigger, more powerful card like Infinite in. Same thing with Doom, same thing with America Chavez. Again, we're talking Negative Affliction. Scorpion is always going to be an option for a flex card here. I mentioned Living Tribunal Tribunal earlier, anytime you have the potential for one lane to have a number of cards with a lot of power in it, Living Tribunal comes into play and can be really powerful. So while that card is not in game yet, I found it really important to list as a flex card here so you could see the potential opportunity for this deck to be even better with that card. Given that we've got so many high power cards in here, you've got to throw in Armor as a potential alternate. And I mentioned Infinite as well to potentially get drawn in from the Lockjaw. The only thing I don't like about the Infinite in this deck is that you are unlikely to play it if it's in your hand. You really wanted to get pulled out from the Lockjaw. Doom is just another good card to have as a 6-cost card to pull out so you can spread some power across the board. And again, America Chavez is a strong card at 9 power and thins the deck. Some cards we left off this graphic: Nebula, just a generally strong 1-cost card. Certainly Sunspot could go along with it as well anytime you have unspent energy. Cosmo to protect your bigs. Had Hood on here for 1 second because it's a low cost and it adds a demon, and if you play into Lockjaw, it goes back into your deck so you don't have that -2 on the board. But given that you've got Infinity Stones, your hand could clog up really quickly with that, so I'm not sure it's a good option. And really, any high power card you could drop in here with Giganto, Magneto, but be careful, it's going to move some of your opponent's cards. I mean, if you wanted Death, but there's 0 chance to play her without a Lockjaw situation, shoot, you could even throw Leech in this if you really wanted to. So just look out for those Shang-Chi's on this. Cosmos for any of your on reveals. Again, Enchantress for the ongoing, especially if you get Living Tribunal. And sort of Killmonger, though you don't really have a lot of ones. The Soul Stone could matter there, and if that's taken out, that's no good. I definitely wouldn't call it a major concern with Killmonger, though. So what do you think? These high evolutionary decks that we put together, I really wanted to get the brain juices flowing and the gameplay going. I'm curious to see how this particular card affects the meta, what sort of archetypes come from it. What other cards would you throw in with these decks, or what other decks are you looking at to play with High Evolutionary? I've heard everybody say he's way overhyped to I cannot wait for him. He's going to be super powerful. That is one of the things I enjoy about this game, is the fact that you can have just both ends of that spectrum, and we're just going to have to see how it plays out. Let me know which of these decks you like or hate, what changes you'd make to them. Would love to hear any of your comments in the comment section below. If this video has been helpful for you at all, please consider hammering down on that like button, sharing with your aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, neighbors, grandma, grandpas, man, anybody. It's all appreciated. If you're looking to see these decks in the future, come to the Discord, which is in the description below. We will have them in a channel that's called WolverDecks, and that way you can check them out anytime. So thanks again for making it this far, and until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.